January 2019. The Pentagon activated emergency contingency plans. Operation Resolute Fortress. Hundreds of Delta Force operators. 5,000 Marines. Pre-positioned for rapid deployment to Venezuela. Not an invasion. A non-combatant evacuation operation. Extracting American citizens and embassy personnel from Caracas as Venezuela collapsed into chaos. But here's what made this terrifying for the Maduro regime. If those forces entered Venezuela to evacuate Americans, they weren't leaving until regime change was complete. 5,000 Marines don't just rescue civilians and fly home. They secure territory, eliminate threats, create facts on the ground. Venezuela was hours away from losing control of their own capital, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. This is the story of how close Venezuela came to American military intervention and why Maduro still fears it today. By January 2019, Venezuela was imploding. Hyperinflation exceeded 10 million%. Food shortages, medicine shortages, electricity blackouts lasting days. Economic collapse unprecedented in modern history. President Nicolás Maduro clung to power through military force and Cuban intelligence support. Opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president. Over 50 nations recognized Guaido's government, including the United States. Massive protests erupted across Venezuela, millions demanding Maduro's resignation. Security forces responded with brutal crackdowns. Live ammunition fired into crowds. Hundreds killed. Thousands were arrested and tortured. The situation for Americans in Venezuela deteriorated rapidly. Over 10,000 U.S. citizens lived in Venezuela. Embassy staff, oil company employees, aid workers, teachers, retirees with Venezuelan families. Venezuelan security forces began targeting Americans. Arbitrary arrests, accusations of espionage. Several American citizens were detained on fabricated charges, used as political leverage against the United States. The U.S. Embassy in Caracas reported escalating threats, armed gangs, colectivos loyal to Maduro conducting surveillance of American facilities, intelligence suggesting planned attacks on embassy compound. The 23rd of January 2019, the State Department ordered all non-emergency embassy personnel and their families to evacuate Venezuela. Official travel advisory raised to level 4. Do not travel. But evacuating 10,000 American citizens from a collapsing hostile nation isn't simple. Commercial flights were unreliable. Venezuelan security forces controlled airports. Americans attempting to leave faced harassment, detention, and extortion. The Pentagon faced a nightmare scenario. Thousands of Americans trapped in hostile territory. The government is losing control. The security situation deteriorated by the hour. Time to activate contingency plans. Plans the Pentagon had been refining for months. The Pentagon doesn't publicize its NEO, Non-combatant Evacuation Operation plans. But intelligence leaks and military sources reveal the scope. Operation Resolute Fortress involved 3 components, each designed for a specific mission phase. First, Delta Force operators. Approximately 200 personnel from 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, based at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Mission: Advance Force Operations. Delta operators would infiltrate Caracas covertly days before main force arrival. Secure embassy compound. Establish communications. Identify threats. Prepare evacuation routes and landing zones. Classic special operations preparation. These operators don't wear uniforms identifying them as military. They blend in. Civilian clothes. Venezuelan appearance where possible. Operating in small teams. Invisible until they strike. Second, 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. Over 2,000 Marines with full combat equipment. Amphibious assault ships, USS Kearsarge and USS Arlington pre-positioned in the Caribbean. Less than 24 hours sailing time from Venezuelan coast. MIU mission: secure and hold. Land via helicopter and amphibious vehicles. Establish a perimeter around the embassy and evacuation assembly points. hold against any Venezuelan military or paramilitary forces attempting interference. Third, 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. Additional 2,500 Marines staged at bases in North Carolina and South Carolina, ready for immediate airlift deployment. C. 17 transport aircraft on standby at Pope Army Airfield. This second wave would reinforce initial forces, expand the security perimeter, secure Caracas International Airport, establish an air bridge for evacuating thousands of Americans via commercial and military aircraft. Total force, over 5,000 Marines, 200 Delta Force, plus Air Force assets providing air support, transport, and intelligence. Navy ships provide fire support if needed. This wasn't a small embassy evacuation. This was an overwhelming military force capable of controlling Venezuela's capital. Delta Force operators began positioning in late January 2019. Exact methods remain classified, but standard Delta infiltration techniques include commercial flights to neighboring Colombia or Brazil, then covert ground crossing into Venezuela. Some operators likely entered Venezuela weeks earlier, establishing cover identities, posing as journalists, businessmen, aid workers, conducting reconnaissance, mapping routes, identifying Venezuelan security force positions. By the time Maduro's intelligence services realized Delta Force was in Caracas, it would be too late. The embassy compound would be fortified, evacuation plans finalized. Venezuelan security forces identified and tracked. The MEU insertion plan was more direct. Helicopter assault from amphibious ships, MV-22, Ospreys and CH-53, Super Stallions carrying Marines, directly to landing zones in Caracas. Flight time from ships to Caracas, approximately 40 minutes. Venezuelan air defenses would detect the helicopters. But shooting at American military aircraft means war with the United States. Venezuelan commanders would face an impossible choice: let Americans land or start war they'd lose in hours. The second Marine wave would deploy via C-17s to Caracas International Airport, assuming Delta Force and 1st MEU secured the airport. Massive airlift operation bringing thousands of Marines with vehicles, equipment, ammunition. Within 12 hours of operation start, American forces would control U.S. Embassy compound, major evacuation assembly points across Caracas, Simón Bolívar International Airport, key road corridors connecting these locations. The Venezuelan military would be faced with fait accompli. Americans control capital. Any attack on U.S. forces means full-scale war. Better to let them evacuate civilians and leave. Except they wouldn't leave. Not quickly, not without achieving broader objectives. Here's what Pentagon planners understood, but didn't say publicly. Once 5,000 Marines entered Caracas, the Maduro regime was finished. Not officially, not legally, but practically. American forces securing the capital would create a power vacuum. Venezuelan military commanders would face a choice: support the failing regime or align with Americans and opposition. Most would choose survival. The Venezuelan military wasn't loyal to Maduro personally. They were loyal to their own interests, staying alive, protecting families, maintaining power and wealth. With Americans controlling Caracas, Venezuelan generals would calculate quickly. Maduro was a liability. Opposition leader Guaido, recognized by over 50 nations, offered political legitimacy. Supporting regime change meant staying on the winning side. Delta Force operators weren't just in Caracas to secure the embassy. They were conducting liaison with Venezuelan military units willing to defect, offering guarantees, coordination, intelligence on which commanders supported transition. This is how regime change actually happens. Not through invasion and occupation, through creating conditions where local forces execute the change themselves. U.S. Marines provide security for evacuation. While they're present, the Venezuelan opposition holds mass rallies knowing security forces won't attack with Americans watching. Military units defect without fear of immediate reprisal. Maduro's inner circle flees to Cuba or Russia. By the time Marines withdraw, a new government is in place. Maduro is gone. Mission accomplished, without US forces firing a shot at Venezuelan military. This is exactly what happened in Grenada in 1983, Panama in 1989, Haiti in 1994. US military presence enables political transition. Local forces do the heavy lifting. Maduro understood this perfectly. That's why Operation Resolute Fortress terrified him. Venezuelan military planners conducted urgent assessments. Could they stop American intervention? The answer was unambiguous. No. Venezuela's military looked impressive on paper. 123,000 active duty personnel, Sukhoi Su-30 fighter jets, Russian-made S-300 air defense systems, Chinese-supplied armored vehicles. But paper strength doesn't translate to combat capability against the United States. The Venezuelan Air Force had maybe 20 operational fighters. Maintenance issues grounded most aircraft. Pilot training was minimal. Fuel shortages limited flight hours. Against US Air Force and Navy aircraft with superior technology and pilot skill, massacred in minutes. Air defenses were obsolete. S-300 systems might detect American helicopters, but engaging US military aircraft means full-scale war. Then Venezuelan air defense sites get hit by Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from ships and submarines, destroyed before they fire second salvo. Ground forces were demoralized. Soldiers hadn't been paid properly in months. Equipment was outdated and poorly maintained. More importantly, troops had no willingness to die defending Maduro. Venezuelan generals knew the military math. 5,000 Marines with air support, naval gunfire support, and advanced technology would destroy any Venezuelan force attempting opposition. It wouldn't even be close. The only rational option was avoiding confrontation. Let Americans evacuate their citizens. Hope they leave afterward. Because fighting meant Venezuelan military destruction, personal death or imprisonment. Certain regime collapse anyway. Better to survive and negotiate afterward. Operation Resolute Fortress came within days of execution. Marines were staged. Delta Force was positioning. Orders were drafted pending presidential authorization. Then the situation stabilized slightly. Just enough. Maduro pulled back from the brink, stopped overt attacks on Americans, released several detained US citizens, made concessions showing he understood the stakes. Cuban and Russian advisors warned Maduro. American military intervention would end his regime. Guaranteed. Better to ease pressure. Let some Americans leave voluntarily. Avoid triggering the Pentagon's operation. The Trump administration also faced political constraints. Military intervention in Venezuela, even for evacuation, would spark massive domestic debate. Democrats would oppose it. Another endless war. Regime change for oil. International criticism. Easier to maintain pressure through sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Support opposition politically. Keep military options as a threat. Use leverage without deploying forces. Most importantly, enough Americans evacuated voluntarily. Numbers dropped from 10,000 to under 5,000 by March 2019. State Department revised assessment. Still dangerous, but not requiring military evacuation operations. The immediate trigger for Operation Resolute Fortress disappeared. Crisis de-escalated. But the plans remain. Updated continuously. Marines still train for Venezuela scenarios. Delta Force maintains intelligence networks inside the country. Ships pre-positioned in the Caribbean. If the situation deteriorates again, Operation Resolute Fortress goes from planning to execution in hours. Not days, hours. And Maduro knows it. Operation Resolute Fortress, even unexecuted, fundamentally changed Venezuelan political reality. Maduro understands he survives at American sufferance. The moment the US decides regime change is necessary, it happens. No question, no resistance, just an inevitable outcome. This constrains Venezuelan behavior. Maduro can't cross certain lines, can't openly attack American interests, can't seize American assets, can't significantly harm American citizens. Because crossing those lines triggers Operation Resolute Fortress, and that means the regime ends. Venezuela came within days of losing control to American military intervention. Hundreds of Delta Force operators, 5,000 Marines, naval vessels, air power. Enough combat power to control Caracas and enable regime change. The operation didn't execute, but the threat remains. Plans are updated, forces are ready, training continues. 5,000 Marines don't just evacuate civilians. They create facts on the ground, change regimes, accomplish objectives beyond stated mission. Venezuela learned that lesson without experiencing it firsthand. Smart move, because the alternative was regime collapse in under a week. If you want more stories about military operations, strategic planning, and how U.S. forces prepare for crisis intervention, hit that subscribe button for Battlescope. Don't forget to smash that like button and share this video with anyone interested in special operations and military contingency planning. Drop a comment below. Should the U.S. have executed Operation Resolute Fortress, or was restraint the right call? Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay informed, and remember, the most powerful military operations are the ones that never need to execute.